Hello everyone, I hope you all are doing fine. And guess what? We are bringing you Unit 2 today and it is Research Aptitude. There will be total 7 sessions where we'll cover everything about research. And I promise you, after attending all these 7 sessions, you will be able to answer all your questions in the exam, especially on research. And it's very good and it's all about your understanding, how you understand this particular unit, right? Because the words can be changed in the exam, they will use different words. We'll also talk about that in our session. But first, let me tell you the meanings of research, and also we'll talk about the function of research and the objectives of research, right? So let me tell you the meaning. So if you know what is the meaning, you can write in the chat box or comment box. By the way, let me tell you, so research is basically this cool and creative process we use to tug up what we know about this stuff, right? Think of it like going on a treasure hunt where the treasure is more like a knowledge, right? You gather info, then what you do, you sort it out and then analyze it to get a better picture on a topic or a problem that you have chosen, right? And sometime you might even revisit old projects to see if what worked before still holds up, or to test out old methods and tools, right? And let me tell you, the word research actually comes from some pretty old French words. It started off the researchy, which is in Middle French, which means something like going about seeking. This term itself came from an even older French word, which is the researcher, and which is a mix of re, that means again, and the searcher is searcher, right? To search. It's been around since like way back in 1577. So when we talk about basic research, we are focusing on just getting down to the nitty gritty of understanding things, finding new methods, and adding to our knowledge pool. And guess what? The way people do research in different fields, especially like science, humanities, art, economics, business, or even tech. And it can be pretty different because, you know, they all have their own ways of looking at the world, right? And that is also called epistemology. And there is a whole kind of, buffet of research, types out there. We'll also talk about in this session all these types of research like scientific, humanities, artistic, economic, social, you just name it, everything we have mentioned. So total there are like 20 research types that we'll talk about in this session. Anyway, then there is this super cool thing called meta research, right? And meta research is what? Which is basically research on how research is done. It's like thinking about thinking, right? Now let me tell you about the definition of research. And research really means what? It's kind of like a puzzle, right? And everyone seems to have a slightly different way of describing it. So different meanings are out there about the research. Let me tell you, the folks at the OECD say that research is like being a creative detective, and it's all about digging deep, learning new stuff about people, their culture, and society, and then using what you find to come up with cool new ideas, theories, or inventions. Another guy, John W. Creswell, has a more step by step take. He says research is like going on a mini adventure to understand something better. What he says, first you come up with a burning question, right? Then you gather all the clues, which is your data that you can find, and what you do, and finally you put it all together to solve the mystery, and what you answer your question, right? And if you check out the Merriam-Webster dictionary, they describe research as a deep dive into studying something. It's like being a detective and a scientist at the same time, looking for facts, right? Testing out theories, or maybe even coming up with some new rules or ideas based on what you find. Another guy, John W. Best, adds kind of, another layer. He thinks of research as a super focused and unbiased way to observe and record things. It's like putting together a giant jigsaw puzzle of observation that can help us make predictions and maybe even get a grip on controlling certain events. And then there is KV Rao, who thinks research isn't just about collecting facts, it's more about understanding the big picture. It's not just learning for the sake of learning, but really like digging into what these facts means for us and how we can use them to plan, ahead and make better decisions. So that was the definition, guy. Next we'll talk about the function of research. First, think of research as your treasure hunt, right? And it's all about digging up new facts and gathering a deep understanding of different subjects. It's like being a detective in the world of education, uncovering new truths and insights. Now let's talk about how research helps to connect the dots. It shows us how different things are related, which is very useful, right? Especially for teachers. It makes teaching more dynamic and interesting because you see how everything fits together. Planning is a huge part of research that we'll talk about in a later session anyway. So it's a kind of like planning a road trip. It guides us, know, like where to go and what to look into. Without a plan, research can get messy and very confusing. And here's the fun part about theories in research. It's like a theory factory. Research kicks off new theories every time, and gives a makeover to old ones. Brings theory into, sharper focus and makes them clearer to understand. It's like cleaning a foggy window so we can see theory landscape much better. Right, research is also like having a crystal ball for business. It helps identify cool opportunity and potential risk. Think of it as a tool to predict what's, trending and what's not in the market. And it's a big problem solver too. Research tackles challenges head on, like helping companies and individuals to grow and improve. It's like being a superhero who solves problems with the power of what? Knowledge, right? And let's not forget research make things better for individuals too. Take example for teachers, right? Research helps them to teach like more effectively and creatively. It's all about improving how we do things, whether in teaching, business, or any field, you name it. And lastly, research is a buddy for problem solving. It also like keeps our solutions real and practical, making sure we are solving real world issues effectively. For that, we have steps that we'll talk about in our next session. So in this session, as I told you, we're going to talk about around 20 different types of research. Like in previous year exam, they have asked like different types of research and there is steps as well, right? Now that was the function. Now let me tell you about the objectives of research. You see, there are like 20 points that I have given and they are equally important. Remember the first four topic like what is the research and the function and the purpose and the objective, they don't ask in the exam, right? I'm just only giving you the idea that you should know. Like we are starting from the beginning, right? So we have to follow the steps. And you have to pay attention more when we talk about the types of research and then the steps of research. Then we'll talk about, how to formulate hypotheses. Then we'll talk about, how to conduct sampling. Then we'll talk about the errors. Then how you visualize, how you generalize. All these stuff we'll talk about in our later session. So let's come back here and talk about the objective research. So let's break down what research is all about, right? Think of research as a cool journey to level up our knowledge with some awesome scientific theories, concepts, and ideas, right? And why this research is important actually to make the world a better place, of course, right? And here's the lowdown on what makes research really interesting. And research is all about taking action. It's not just about sitting around, and it's all about kind of, doing stuff that really matters. And we got to keep our research top notch. And why? Because we want our findings to rock the real world, not just our lab or library, right? And of course, Keep it short and sweet. When we talk about what we are researching, let's not, beat around the bush and make big sentences and all this stuff. But you know it is very important that your topic should be clear, and of course be super clear about what we are trying to find, like no riddle, no mysteries, everyone should get it right way. And doing research is like very important, especially for big deals like global health, and we're talking about saving lives, right? And these are the steps that is important. Anyway, research is a bit like video game also. We keep leveling up our knowledge, our questions, methods and ideas. It's a constant cycle of getting better and sharper. And let's not get lost in the clouds. Our research should be laser focused and pinpoint specific. Right? We need a goal, right? Like a finish line to race towards. And what are we trying to achieve with our research? It's very important that you should have a clear goal regarding it. And picture research like looking through a special pair of glasses. We choose what to focus and how to view it. Research isn't just like a quick glance at a problem. It's like detective work, thorough, detailed, and using smart scientific methods. And these all methods we are also going to cover in our later session. As I told you, we'll have 7 sessions that we have to, you know, attend. And trust me, after these 7 sessions, you will be able to answer any question based on research. Anyway, one of the coolest thing about research, it's like exploring new worlds, finding stuff we didn't even know about was there, right? And if we are focused on practical stuff, we might not be adding brand new knowledge to the world, but what we are doing, we could be finding new ways to use what we already know, right? And when we talk about application in research, it means taking what we learn and using it to make things better or different, like coming up with new way to use electricity, right? And this is also applied research that we'll talk about anyway. Right, so that was all about the objective, guys. Let me tell you the types of research. You see, there are so many types of research, starting with scientific research, then fundamental research, we have applied research, descriptive research, you name it, all kind of, types of research is there in front of your screen. And we'll talk about it one by one. Right, let's talk about scientific research. As you can see over your screen and in the photo, the scientist is doing some stuff with DNA and all biological stuff, but it can also be in different way. But anyway, let me tell you, it's basically how researchers get curious, right? Dig up data and try to explain all the cool stuff about nature and the universe. Plus, it helps in making things that we can actually use. And this scientific research actually is done by big, organization. And because it requires a lot of money, right? And who pays for all this research? Well, it's a mix of government bodies, sometimes charities, and even big companies to do research. Right, and there are different types of research depending on what you are studying or what you want to do with it. But whether it's just for knowledge, like fundamental knowledge, or for creating something which is applied, right? Most research projects follow these steps that you can see over your screen. What they do, they observation and topic formation. It's very important. What you do first, you find something that grabs your interest and you start exploring it. Then what you do, then you make a smart guess, which is hypothesis, which is all about how things might be connected. Then we use, conceptual definition, and this is where you describe your idea based on how it links with other ideas. Then we have operational definition. Here what you do, here you get a specific idea about what you are studying and how you'll measure it. Then what we do in scientific research, that you collect data. Next you pick up some samples and gather info, from or about them. Remember, your tools need to be legit, valid and reliable in it. And then what you do, you analyze data, you break down the data into pieces and see what it tells you, right? And then what we do after the analysis, we interpret that data and that show off your findings with cool charts, maybe graphs or picture, and then explain what they mean. Right, and at the end, what you do? Testing and revising hypothesis. You check, like if your guess was right. If not, then what? Redo it. And then we have at the end conclusion. And finally, what we do? We wrap it up with your findings. Sometimes you might need to go back and do it all over again if the research is not, up to the mark. But anyway, that was all about the scientific research. Now let me tell you about the fundamental research. So by the word you can understand it's a basic research, which is like pure or fundamental research, right? So let's talk about this fundamental research. So you might have also heard it like, basic research, right? Or pure research. This type of research is all about digging deep into scientific theories to better understand and predict what happens in the natural world. Now, don't confuse with this applied research. That is completely different one. While fundamental research is like getting to know the game's rules. Applied research is about using those rules to actually play the game, like coming up with new tech or method to change or work with natural phenomena. A lot of time, the people doing fundamental research are driven by pure curiosity. They just want to know more, right? And guess what? This curiosity often ends up what is sparking some pretty cool advancement in applied science. It's like being curious about how a magic trick works and then using that knowledge to create an even cooler, methods. And also when it comes to research and development, there is usually a goal to balance both fundamental and applied research. It's like making sure you both understand the science behind what's happening and then using that understanding to create something beautiful and awesome. And let me give you a real life example of that fundamental research. Like, think about how companies figure out the best spots to place their product in movies or TV shows. Right? That product placement for you. And they're not just throwing things in randomly, right? They're critically examining what makes a brand stand out and how different stages in a product's life cycle affects its popularity. And all of this is backed by some serious fundamental basic research that they have done it, right? I hope that makes sense to you. But anyway, that was all about the fundamental research. And let's talk about the applied research, what it is. It's like the superhero of the research, very important. And in exam you have got this question also based on applied research. So think of it as a science's way of tackling everyday challenges in our lives, work, health, and well being. The goal here is pretty cool. Come up with fresh solutions to issues that bug us as individual or groups or even society. Imagine using scientific detective skills to crack everyday mystery, and that's called applied research. So a researcher doing this kind of work is also like a detective. They spot a problem, then come up with a guess, which is your hypothesis, and then do experiments to see if they are right. It's all about using what we know, right? And what we know is what empirical method to fix practical issues. And there are three main types of this particular applied research. First is evaluation research. This is like, think of this as giving a, report card to programs or activities. It helps decide if something is working well or needs a kind of, fixing. Then we have like development research, and this one's all about creating and testing new educational programs or tools. It's like being a teacher scientist at the same time. They're making, sure things work and help in learning. Then we have action research, and this particular is super relevant for social science. It's like a combo of deep thinking, taking action, and research, all to make big positive changes. Teachers love this one, especially for improving their classrooms. It's like a rinse and repeat process. Like find a problem, then gather information and figure out the solution, all this stuff. And applied research isn't just logged in a lab, it's everywhere. beginning from medicine or education, you can name for business, engineering, psychology, and health. You name it, everything requires that applied research, and applied research is there making things better for you. So next time when you hear about some cool new gadget or teaching method or kind of health tip, there must be a good chance that applied research was taken for this, and it's science in action making our world a better place. So that was about what, guys, applied research. Now let's talk about quantitative research. So by the word you can understand it's about the number and statistics, right? And it's like when you're trying to figure out stuff by counting or measuring things, think of it as the more kind of a number focused side of research. We use a deductive approach here. This means we have a theory, or we start with a theory or idea, and then what we do, we test it out and to see if it holds up or if it is true. And it's like having a hunch and then going out to see if you're right. Right. And quantitative research is all about the question. What question? How much? How many? It's pretty structured and organized, not just kind of random counting. It's very important that you should mention these questions. But anyway, this type of research is a big deal in fields like science, especially in engineering, social sciences. Basically, anywhere you look, at things in measurable way, we are trying to be as objective as possible, looking at what we can actually see and measure. The main tools in quantitative research is what? Mathematical models and of course theories. We're trying to link what we observe with numbers and equations. So what counts as quantitative data is anything you can put on number, like statistics, we have percentage and so on. We use statistics a lot to make sense of the data. The goal is to get results that aren't biased or wrong and can be applied to more people or situation. And quantitative research is everywhere. It can be found in psychology, economics, sociology, marketing, or even in health and political sciences. But it's not that common in anthropology and history. Right? We use qualitative research for that. And when we say quantitative in subject like physics, it's kind of a given since physics is all about measurement and numbers. And this approach has its root in positivism and statistic history. And positivism and post-positivism we'll talk about in this session at the end of the session. Right? And this approach, it's like the opposite of qualitative data. What? This particular quantitative data, which are more about understanding things in depth, not just counting them. We can check if our guesses or these hypotheses are right using quantitative methods. This can include doing surveys, interviews, or polls. Lastly, when we talk about the scientific method in quantitative research, we mean coming up with models of theories, finding ways to measure stuff, controlling variables in experiments, collecting and analyzing data, and then figuring out what it all means. So guys, that's quantitative research for you. Next, we'll talk about qualitative research. Quite important. Usually we use for this inductive method that we'll talk about anyway. So what is qualitative research? This kind of research is very interesting because it's all about understanding people's experiences, their thoughts. Imagine just chatting with people using only questionnaires, hanging out in focus groups, or even just observing what's happening around you. That's qualitative research for you. It's like being a detective in real life where you collect all sorts of cool stuff like interviews, case studies, and even artifacts. Now here's the thing, qualitative research doesn't really care about numbers or stats. It's more about exploring ideas and experiences without putting them into neat clear boxes. Think of it as a way to really get into the nitty-gritty of how people see the world. In qualitative research, we use some very important and awesome methods like ethnography, which is like deeping dive into people's culture, right? Then we have grounded theory, which is like building theories based on what you see and hear. Then we have discourse analysis, looking at how people talk and communicate, and interpretive phenomenology, which is like trying to understand how people experience things. This type of research is super popular in fields like humanities, sociology, anthropology, political science, psychology, then social work, and even education. It's all about getting into the minds of people and understanding their perspectives. So remember, in qualitative research, we focus on a specific situation or people. We are not trying to make big general statement about everyone, just forming some cool hypotheses based on what we find in our specific studies. And how do we collect all these information in this qualitative research? Through discussions, observation, one-to-one interviews, and even some fun tests like word association, story completion, and sentence completions. So that's qualitative research, guys. We'll also talk about qualitative research method in a later session, then it will be really clear. But for now, I think you should understand that qualitative research is all about facts, idea, concepts, all these stuffs, and quantitative research is what it talks about numbers, right? Next, we'll talk about inductive research. As you can see over your screen, inductive means what? People usually apply this in qualitative research. Okay, let me tell you in detail what is this inductive research. And if you get this point, what is inductive, what is deductive, what is quantitative and qualitative, then guys, 2 marks is, that's what you are going to get. So let's talk about this inductive research. It's like a detective where you start by looking at a specific things you have noticed and then try to figure out some general rules or ideas from there, right? Basically, you're spotting patterns in what you see and then coming up with explanations or guesses, which is your hypothesis, right? About why these patterns actually exist. Think of it that way. You're taking a bunch of detailed observation and making broad statements based on that. And it's different from deductive reasoning, where you start with a general statements and then look at a specific cases, right? But here it's completely different. Inductive analysis is super helpful, especially when you're working with qualitative data like people's opinion, their theories, their ideas or experience, and trying to figure out what it all means. It's a bit like putting together a puzzle. You look at each pieces, which is observation, and try to see the bigger picture. And here's cool thing about inductive argument, that they are based on probability. If your starting points, like your premises, are solid, then your conclusion is likely 100%, but not completely 100% guaranteed, right? And this is different from deductive argument, where if your premises are true, your conclusion is definitely true. And inductive research is great when there is not much already known about a particular topic. And it's like exploring uncharted territory without a map. You're not testing existing theories, but you're creating new ones, right? But remember, an inductive conclusion can't be proven, for sure. It can, however, be proven wrong later, which is still, it's a kind of really valuable in science. Let's break down the inductive approach into 3 simple steps. First, what you do, observation. This is where you start, right? You notice something specific and begin from there. For example, you see that a flight from a low budget airline is delayed. That's what you observed, right? You thought. Then what you observe a pattern. Like next, what you do, you look for more example and start seeing a pattern, like noticing like another 20 flights from budget airlines are also delayed. So you develop a theory, like, finally you come up with the general ideas of theory, and you maybe start thinking like budget airlines always have delays. But remember, just because if it seems true, what you have seen, it doesn't mean it's always true. So these are the pattern, right? So that is your inductive research. Next, we're going to talk about deductive research. It's completely opposite of inductive because it's a cool way of figuring things out in a logical way. Imagine it like going from a broad idea to a super specific conclusion. It's kind of like starting with a big picture and then zooming in the details, or top down approach. Right. First off, we might come up with a theory about something we are curious about. And once we have that big idea, we break it down into smaller testable guesses called hypotheses. We do some digging into what's already known about our topic, then check out theories others have made, and then we put our hypothesis to the test. So deductive research basically start with a theory, not like inductive that first you observe the pattern and then you come up with theory. Here what you're doing, you start with a theory, usually something we figure out using inductive research, which is like, as I told you, completely opposite process. Our job is to test these theories, but here's the catch: we can't do this deductive stuff unless we already have a theory in a place. Otherwise it will be your inductive. So the process is like reversing what we do in inductive research. We pick up a cool social theory, then see how it holds up with real data. The thing is, our conclusion is deductive reasoning are only solid if everything we assumed in our theory is right and we are super clear about what we are talking about. And let me break down these steps of deductive research. First, what you do, you have a general idea. Like, start with a problem and existing question. For example, like low cost airlines always have delays. So that is your statement in the beginning. You're not like inductive reasoning, you're observing first flight, then second flight, then 20 flights, then you come up with the idea. Here is completely different. Here you are coming with a problem first, or theory. Like here, low cost airlines always have delays. Then what do you do? Then you make a hypothesis that we can prove wrong based on our theory. Like if you fly with a low cost airlines, you'll probably be delayed. And next, what we do, we gather data to check if these hypotheses are right? And in example, we collect flight times of budget airlines. And after that, we analyze our data and see if our guesses holds up. Say we find that only 5 out of 100 flights on low budget, airlines are on time. So finally, we think about whether our finding let us ditch our original guesses. Like if 5 out of 100 flights are on time, maybe low cost airlines aren't always delayed. So we might need to rethink our hypothesis. So that is your deductive research. Next, we have empirical research. Let me break it down for you. Basically, it's all about learning from real life stuff. You observe things or experience them directly or indirectly, and bam, you're gaining knowledge, right? Think of it like being a detective in your own life. You can use different tools for your investigation, like quantitative numbers and stats, right? And qualitative also, you can use more like interviews and observations. And it's like having both a microscope and magnifying glass at the same time. Different subjects need different research design, right? And like if you're studying people or education, you might mix up both qualitative and quantitative method, especially since you can't really put these fields in a lab and poke around, right? Now let's talk about A.D. Groot's cool empirical cycle. First, we observe, right? This is where you start asking questions like, does jamming to tunes while cramming words mess up with your memory? You induct, right? Then you start doing the induction. Like here, you look at what you observed and try to spot patterns, right? Maybe you notice that listening to music does make word learning a bit more. And then deduction, this part is about starting with a theory and making some guesses, your hypothesis based on it. Then you go out and collect data. If you see if you're right, like if you think studying with music will make you forget words, you test it out. And then when it's time to roll up your sleeves and do some experiments to see if your prediction hold right in your testing steps. Then you evaluate. After the experiment, you see if your ideas were on point. Now, next we are going to talk about the mixed research. So, this cool approach where researchers mix up both quantitative and qualitative methods to get answer to their questions. Think of it like a recipe that blends the best of both worlds. You get the precise numbers from quantitative stuff and the detailed personal stories from qualitative research. This method is very useful, especially in areas like behavioral sciences, health, and social sciences. It's like having a Swiss Army knife for research. Really handy for tackling complex issues that need insights from different angles, especially when you're working across different fields. For instance, in user research, something companies like Spotify, Airbnb, Lyft, you know, they use this mixed methods, and they mean combining hard data with real user feedback. It's all about getting those, details from people's experiences and backing them up with solid stats. So this way they get a much clearer picture of what their users need and really desire and want. Then we have structured research. So imagine you're doing a research project and you've got a bunch of questions you want to ask people. So what do you do? In a structured interview, you'd have all these important questions written down beforehand. And they're usually the kind where people can only answer with yes or no or choose, from a list of options. Think of it like survey interview. Like those questionnaires you sometimes fill out. Researchers use this method a lot, especially when they want to collect clear, straightforward data. So the cool thing about doing interviews this way is what you ask everyone the exact same questions in same order. This makes it super easy to compare the answers from different people or group, or even look at how answers might change over time if you do the survey one more time, right? So that is your structured. Then we have unstructured research. So it's completely opposite to structured. So how in a typical interviews there is usually a set of list of questions and everything is structured, right? But here in an unstructured interview, it's a whole different ball game. The researcher gets to mix up things up, creating new question on the fly as they learn new stuff from the person they're talking to. It's like having a conversation where you're just going with the flow. You ask question one by one, rather than like sticking up to a script. Now, when it comes to market research, there is this cool thing where the questions are designed in a way that they don't push the person answering toward a specific response. It's all about getting genuine, unbiased answers. Also, in these kinds of interviews, the questions aren't set in stone. They can ask anything. They can change based on how much the interviewee, knows or what they believe. It's like tailoring the conversation to fit the person you're chatting with, making sure you're on the same page, right? Next, we have conceptual research, and it's a pretty cool because it's all about diving deep into a topic by just observing and analyzing stuff. Think of it like detective work but without the lab coat. And there are no actually experiments here. So what does it focus on? It's all about those abstract ideas and concepts, the kind of stuff that makes you say all these theories and ideas, right? Now here's the neat part of it. Both the number crunching quantitative research and the story like qualitative research can use conceptual framework. In quantitative research, it's like playing with numbers, right? You break down everything into variables to measure and play around with numbers. On the flip side, in qualitative research, we stay more in the realm of ideas and concepts. It's less about numbers and more about exploring and understanding the big picture. Right, next we have logical research. So, when we talk about logical research, think of it as are following a step-by-step process that sticks to some solid rules. It's like putting together a puzzle using a specific method. In this kind of research, we often use two important methods, induction and deduction. As I told you in this session itself, that induction is like a starting point with a small piece of puzzle. You observe things and then you come out with a general question, right? And on the other hand, deduction is like having an idea already of the big picture, and then what you try to find those pieces if that fits that idea, right? Now remember, logical research is all about thinking things through a smart way and also in logical way. You can't really get far in research if you don't play around with ideas in a logical manner. Also, it's super important to make your research reductive. This basically means you're going to be able to share your findings with other researchers. Why? So they don't end up doing the same stuff that you did, right? It's all about working smarter but not harder, right? Anyway, that was all about the logical research. Next, we have here descriptive research. So, imagine you're curious about a group of people, like what they are all about, when they do certain things, and how they do them. This descriptive research is all about digging into those details. It's like being a detective, but for stats and facts about a group. The cool thing is, you don't need to figure out why things are the way they are. You're just painting a picture of what's going on right now. It's like taking a snapshot of a group at a specific moment in time. Think of it as grouping, measuring, and comparing stuff to get a clear view. One way to do this is through surveys. You ask a bunch of people, different questions and gather all that information. This helps to see who's doing what and how often. For instance, say you're curious about, kinds of jobs people have in Maryland. You could do a survey to find out their qualification, or if you're wondering if there is a link between how much someone earns and how well their company is doing. Right? A survey can give you the lowdown on their salaries and job performance. So that was descriptive research for you guys. Next, we are talking about analytical research. So this type of research is super precise and reliable. We use well-tested methods that helps us get accurate results and avoid mistakes. It's a big deal for lots of folks like students, doctors, and psychologists, you name it. They all use this analytical research. And what's cool about analytical research is that it's not just about collecting data. It's also about adding new ideas and insights and findings. You have got to put on your detective hat and use your critical thinking skills to dig deep into the facts and info related to your projects. To give you an idea, let's think about two different types of research, right? Say you're looking at how the USA's international trade balance changed from 1974 to 1995. What you're doing, you're basically analyzing it. So if you're just describing those changes, that's descriptive. But if you're analyzing it, but if you're trying to figure out why those changes happen the way they did, you're diving into analytical research. So that's analytical research for you guys. Next, we are going to talk about cyclic research. So by the word, you can understand it's about doing, like cycle research process. So imagine it like a loop. You start with a curious question and end up back there after a kind of research. First off, you pick a cool topic or problem to dig into. Then it's time to hit the books or the internet and see what others have already figured out. Next, you set a goal for your own research. Now the real action starts. You gather all sorts of data and play detective, analyzing what you find, and once you have made some, sense of it all, you come up with your own ideas about what you're finding mean, right? Then there is the twist. Research isn't a straight line, it's more like a spiral or a loop. You'll find yourself going back, checking things again, rethinking, or maybe even redoing some steps. It's all about learning and adjusting as you go. To keep it simple, Let's break it down into 6 easy steps that you can see here. Analyze, get your kind of detective hat on. You analyze it. Then second is determine research tool. Pick your all the tools what is required to do the research. Then you search, you go on this treasure hunt for knowledge. Then you evaluate, you become a judge, then what's useful and what's not, that you'll talk about. And then keep a record, like you all write down your adventure in this particular research. Then repeat again, run the loop again if it need to, otherwise you can stop, but otherwise that's your cyclic research. Anyway, next we are going to talk about controlled research. So by the word you can understand it's all about the control, it's all about the controlling data or variables, right? So think of it like this, like when scientists are doing an experiment, they keep everything the same except for the one thing they're actually testing, right? It's like when you're testing out a new gaming strategy, you don't change your console or game, right? Just the strategy. In these experiments, there are usually two groups. Like one group gets the real deal, the treatment or whatever is being treated. The other group, the control group, is a kind of like the comparison group. They might get nothing or fake version of the treatment, like a sugar pill that looks like the real medicine, or something completely different, and then they do the test. Now here's the twist. In a blind experiment, the folks participating and they have no clue whether they are getting the real treatment or the fake one. It's like being given a mystery soda and trying to guess if it's the brand name, right? And this way the researchers can see if the treatment really works or if people just think it works because they believe they are getting the real thing. So that's how they do that controlled research. Next we're going to talk about hypothesis based research. So by the name you can understand that you have the hypothesis and then you do the research. Basically all the research you have some sort of hypothesis, right? So in hypothesis based research, which you might see in dissertation or thesis, you're basically making a smart guess, right, about what you think will happen in your study. It's not just any guess, it's particularly a smart guess, educated guess. Your hypothesis needs to be super clear, something you can actually test, and importantly something that could be proven wrong if it's not right. Right, when you're designing your research, you set it up to really dig into whether your hypothesis is on the money or not. You're gathering all the evidence to see if it backs up your guesses or just tells you it's not quite right. Let's say you're curious about how not getting enough sleep messes up with how well people do on test, right? Your hypothesis might be like, hey, I think people who don't get enough sleeps are probably going to fail in their test compared to those who sleeps. So that's your starting point, and then you go and see if that's actually how it plays out. Then we have historical research, which is another important, and we'll also talk about in later session also. Suppose they have got the bunch of cool techniques and rules they follow to dig into historical resources and evidence. When historiographers get down to work, they usually stick to 3 main steps. And can you guess what are these? External criticism, internal criticism, and synthesis. Think of it like examining, questioning, and then putting together a big puzzle. There are 2 kinds of criticism to keep in mind: lower criticism and sensual criticism. Depending on what they are researching and their personal style, historian might focus on few key things, like figuring out when something originated, then pinpointing where it happened, then figuring out who wrote or created the source, then analyzing the data they found, right, and making sure the information is complete and hasn't been messed up or tampered, then deciding if the source is really trustworthy. So the end goal of all this detective work is to write a historical research paper. This is what we call a secondary source, which is basically a fancy way of saying it's their interpretation and analysis of primary sources. Let's talk about something cool, artistic research. So, as art education gets more academic, people are starting to see, artistic research as the main way to explore art in different mode or different fields. Now, here's the interesting part. Artistic research is all about embracing, subjectivity, unlike traditional science, where you aim for objectivity. In artistic research, it's totally fine to bring in your own findings and thoughts. Think of it like this. It's a bit like what social scientists do. They use things like interviews and observations to understand stuff, and in artistic research, we also use these tools to measure and analyzing things in art. And who does artistic research? Well, it's mostly artists or artist researchers. But not all art is considered research also. It only becomes research when artists, work together in a critical community, like there was, romanticism or neoclassical. All these are kind of artistic research. Anyway, that was all about the artistic research. Now let's talk about the characteristics of research, which is quite important, right? First characteristics of research is it's empirical. Basically, it means you base your research on real world evidence. You observe, experiment, and gather data to form your conclusion. And it is also systematic. You need to follow a clear step by step method. It's like following a recipe. You can't just skip steps and expect it to work and submit your thesis, right? Then critical. So, research is also like a detective with your own work. Questions everything, your methods, your findings and conclusion. Purposive and objective. Have a clear goal for your research. Know exactly what you're trying to find out and stay focused on. Logical. Make sure that your research makes sense. Connect the dots, logically to reach your conclusion. And controlled. Research characteristics is also controlled. Keep everything except what you're testing the same. This way you know that any changes you see are because of what you're testing. Then generative. Good research opens up with new questions. Think of it as a never ending story where one question leads to another. Then it is hypothesis driven. Start with a guess, which is your hypothesis, right, of what you think is happening. Then test it out and see if you're right or wrong. Then analytical. Look at your data critically. Make sure you understand it correctly. Don't jump to conclusion immediately. And then rigorous. Do your research carefully and thoroughly. It should not be any shortcuts, right? Then replicable. Others should be able to do your experiment again and get similar results. Valid and reliable. Research should be valid and reliable. Your research method should, consistently give you accurate result. Then it should be unbiased. Keep your personal findings or opinion out of your research. Stay neutral and objective. It is also quantitative, right? Use numbers and stats to back up your findings. It should be also reductive. Share your findings so others don't have to redo the same work. Then it should be accurate. Your methods and result, should be spot on. No errors or misinterpretations. Then action oriented. Aim to solve a problem or make a decision based on your research. Then multidisciplinary. Mix and match, methods, from different areas. It's like using different tools from different toolbox. And it should be participatory also. Get everyone involved, from experts to the people your research affects. And it should be simple and cost effective. Also keep it as a straightforward and budget friendly as possible. Then dynamic. Present your finding in a way that's easy to understand and useful for decision making. Then at the end, it should be credible. Make sure your research is believable and based on solid evidence, right? Positivism. Now let's talk about positivism. It's very important topic because in exam you get question based on that also. So what is positivism? It's like saying if we can't see it, touch it or prove it through experiments or logic, then it's not real knowledge. Right? That's positivism. Basically, it's all about what you can experience and prove. So where it came from? This guy Auguste Comte thought it up around the 1800s. He's also the dude who started sociology. And how it grew, positivism didn't just stop with Comte. It went through phases, getting mixed up with other cool ideas, and ended up being a part of this big philosophical club called analytic philosophy. And what are the key points of positivism? It is kind of, real knowledge comes from stuff we can observe and test. There is a whole world of logic and maths that's kind of separate but is still important. And to really get what's going on around us, we need to use our senses, logic, and experience without letting our personal feelings get in a way. So these are very important. And also, there is like if we are going to say something is true, we need evidence that everyone can agree on that is your positivism. And positivists are like scientists. They don't mix up their personal beliefs with their work. We have types of positivism also. It is started with regular positivism, right? Then branched out in logical positivism, then instrumental positivism, and finally we got to post positivism that we'll talk about in our next slide. So positivism is what positivists, what they do, they love using clear cut methods like surveys and statistics, because they think these are more accurate and fair. They believe that society shapes people and that there are certain social facts that influence how we act. And positivism and confidence, it's also about being really sure about what you believe. Like if you're convinced about something, like believing in God, that's a form of positivism. Also, moral judgment. Suppose when someone says something like abortion is wrong, that's their personal view or an attempt to get others to see it their way. It's not actually a positivist statement, since it's about personal beliefs, not observable facts. So that was all about positivism, guys. Now let's talk about what post positivism. As you can see over your screen, we have post positivistic approach. Very important. In last net, they have asked question based on post positivistic approach. Right. So this is also called post empiricism. Also is like the updated version of positivism. It's kind of like how we update our phones to get better features, right? So same, it's the next step of positivism. So post positivism updates and challenges some old school thinking in philosophy, social science, and sciences. So positivism, as we know, is this old way of thinking that's all about using hard evidence like experiments and numbers to understand society. But on the other hand, post positivism is like it's not that simple. It says that when researchers study stuff, they can't just disconnect from who they are and what they believe. Basically, our ideas and who we are shape what we see and think. Think about it. Even in science, which we often believe is kind of super accurate, post positivism tells us there's always some bias. It's like everyone's wearing different kind of colored glasses, so we all see the world differently, right? This way of thinking really shakes things up because it says reality is more about what we as a society agree upon. It's not just a fixed set of facts out there like positivism. So Max Weber, who was very important sociologist, and then we have Karl Popper, another brainy guy, said that science is always work in progress. In his book 1934 book The Logic of Scientific Discovery, he talked about this thing called falsification. It means that for a theory to be scientific, you should be able to prove it wrong. Yeah, it's all about being able to say that it's my bad, the theory is not right, or not just finding stuff that makes it look good. So there should be some, because everybody's perspective is different, right? And Popper also said we can't just say something happens all the time just because we have seen it a bunch. And when it comes to figuring out stuff, we use all sorts of things like gut feelings, beliefs, and even faith, not just cold hard facts, right? Post positivism also reminds us that no one's got a perfect grip on the world. We're all about a bit biased, and our theories color what we see. To get closer to the truth, we gotta look out, problems from many angles. It's like teamwork. By checking each other's work, we help get rid of those biases. Thomas Kuhn, another important big name, he also, talked about positivism with his book 1962 called The Structure of Scientific Revolution. He said science is all about paradigm, which are like the rule books that scientists follow. According to Kuhn, science moves through different stages, starting with a free for all of the ideas, moving to everyone following one main idea, then questioning that idea, and finally switching to a new main idea when the old one doesn't fit anymore. In figuring stuff out, you can start with the theory and then test it with deductive or inductive reasoning, or look at the data first and then come up with a theory, which is your inductive reasoning, right? And positivism is a cool with both ways. Unlike positivism, which was all about kind of numbers, positivism says it's okay to mix numbers and stories to understand things. So finally, post-positivism is all about chasing the truth, but knowing it's super hard to ever fully catch it. It's like knowing that you had, for breakfast, even if you don't remember every details, but you had it, right? So you have a pretty good idea, but you might not remember every single bite, right? So that's your post positivism. So that's all, guys, in this session. In our next session, we're going to talk about the methods of research, where we'll talk about experimental research method, then we'll talk about descriptive research method, then we will also have a discussion on historical research method, and then we have like ex post fact method, which is very important, and sometime in exam they ask question from that also. And then we'll talk about qualitative research method, and then we'll talk about at the end quantitative research method. And after that, in our next session, we'll talk about steps of research as well. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in our next session. Bye bye and have a good day.